holy text surfaced, and sin followed close behind. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me your city. I value your voices. Wolfe begins reading. I was halfway through the Gazette crossword and a glass of milk when the doorbell rang, a combination rare enough to make me suspect trouble. Fritz was in the kitchen making a soufflé that had him muttering German lullabies, and Wolfe was upstairs communing with the orchids, which meant I was elected. When I opened the door, the man standing there looked like someone who had been peeled out of his own conscience and hadn't quite adjusted to the light. His suit was well cut but wrong on him, like it belonged to the idea of himself rather than the reality. He carried a thin briefcase and the expression of someone who'd been rehearsing an apology for years but hadn't yet found the right stage. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, in the tone of a man checking whether he'd reached the executioner or the priest. "That's me. If you're here for Mr. Wolfe, he's cultivating orchids. If you're here for me, you're late for dinner. Which is it?" He glanced past me into the brownstone's front hall. The kind of look that didn't just register the furniture, but took inventory of the moral weight of the place. "I'll wait," he said. "If Mr. Wolfe is upstairs, I can wait." That was the first sign he knew who he was dealing with. Nobody who's ever heard of Nero Wolfe tries to rush him. I took him into the office. Wolfe's chair was empty, looking about as patient as a loaded cannon. I offered the man the red leather one across from it, and he sat like someone taking confession. He set the briefcase on his knees and looked at me. "My name is Reverend Paul Maddox. I'm the minister at St. Anthony's on 84th. I need Mr. Wolfe's help." I didn't blink, but I took my time lighting a cigarette. "You might have read the fine print, Reverend. We deal in human crimes, not divine forgiveness." He opened the briefcase, took out a small envelope, and placed it on Wolfe's blotter. "Then this may interest you. It's not divine. It's personal." I looked at the envelope. Cream paper, expensive. The kind of stationery used for invitations or blackmail, depending on which side of the altar you're on. The handwriting was tight and deliberate. For the Reverend. "Private." "Someone sent you that?" I asked. He nodded. "It came yesterday morning. I'd have dismissed it except the handwriting is familiar." He hesitated, then added, "It's my wife's." That called for a pause. Ministers don't usually hand you marital scandal before lunch. "She's been dead 6 months, he said. At that exact moment, Wolfe's tread sounded on the stairs. I swear I could time a symphony to that man's steps. Slow, even, weighted with certainty. He entered the office like a ship coming into port, nodded at me, then at the visitor. "Good afternoon, sir. I am Nero Wolfe. You appear distressed. Explain why." The Reverend stood. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you for seeing me. My wife, Margaret Maddox, died last March. Heart failure, sudden. A shock to all of us." Wolfe inclined his head an inch. "Condolences." "Yesterday," the Reverend went on, "I received that letter. The handwriting is hers. The words are, well, perhaps you should read them yourself." He passed the envelope over. Wolfe didn't take it. Instead, he gave me a flick of his finger. My cue. I opened the envelope and read aloud. "Paul, the sin you buried will not stay buried. You know what you did. And so do I. No signature, no date. Just that." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, sharper. "The handwriting is unquestionably hers." "Yes. You are certain?" "I officiated her funeral, Mr. Wolfe. I buried her. But this—" His voice trembled, then hardened. "This is her hand. I would swear it." I watched Wolfe's eyes narrow, not in skepticism, but in arithmetic. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Archie," he said, "this is an intrusion." "Yes, sir," I said, "but the interesting kind." Wolfe sighed through his nose. "So it appears." He turned his gaze to the Reverend. You are not here about handwriting or delusion. You are here because you believe this letter implies a crime. Speak plainly." The Reverend hesitated, and I saw it. The hesitation of a man who's confessed everything to God, but still fears confessing to man. "I didn't kill my wife, Mr. Wolfe," he said quietly. "But someone wants the world to think I did." That got Wolfe's attention. He straightened a quarter inch. For him, that's excitement. "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. "Then you have my interest." "Temporarily." The Reverend exhaled as if that single word temporarily was enough to save his soul. Just like that, the sanctity of the brownstone had been breached, not by crime, not yet, but by faith gone rotten at the root. Wolfe didn't move for a long breath. I've seen him do that to people whose confidence has a lot less to lose than a minister's. It isn't a trick. He simply sets his bulk like a landmark and waits until the visitor's story admits it has somewhere else to go. "The letter arrived how?" he asked. "By post," Maddox said. "Yesterday morning. I retrieved it from our box at the rectory after matins." Postmark: "Midtown, day prior." Wolfe flicked 2 fingers, and I passed him the envelope with a handkerchief. He glanced not long enough to read a psalm, then passed it back. "You are certain your wife's hand is not merely imitated?" "I kept every note she ever wrote me," he said, the words landing like pebbles in a basin. "I know how she crossed a T. I know where she lifted the pen." "That may be," Wolfe said, "but certainty is a vice in a man who believes. We will require exemplars." "I brought some." Maddox touched the briefcase, as if he had been bracing it from falling through his knees. "And there is more. Since Margaret died, the parish has had tensions, money, influence. I've tried to maintain order," Wolfe finished for him. "You failed." His face tightened. "I kept the peace, as best I could. You do not come to me for congratulations." Wolfe's eyes closed, opened. "Why us?" Maddox's gaze took a turn around the room and stopped at the empty globe stand, the beer rings on the maple, the one orchid book I hadn't shelved straight. "Because you will not care what I am," he said. "Only what has been done." Wolfe sighed, not theatrically, but like a man losing a bout to propriety. "Pfui." "Archie, telephone Mr. Parker at the Gazette." "Lonely already?" I asked. "For a discreet paragraph in tomorrow's personal column. 4 lines. Penitent seeks author of unsigned note written in a lady's hand. Kindly repeat your confession. Same address." "We will omit address for now. Mr. Parker will know to route replies here. We will see who expects an echo." He focused on Maddox. "Your trouble will come to us. It already has." I went to the phone and got Parker, who owed me a lunch and admitted it. He liked the phrasing well enough to chuckle and promised to set it where it would look accidental. When I turned back, Wolfe had rung for beer and Fritz had materialized with a tray, and that soufflé scent following him like a hymn. One of the benefits of employment here is that suspense is seasoned. "Your retainer," Wolfe said. $1,200. He said it the way he might announce the season's first white peach. Maddox looked pained, then resigned. "That is possible. From me." "Not from your parish," Wolfe said. "If this affair is ecclesiastical, it is also human, and your church shall keep its purse for incense and roof leaks. You are the client." "Agreed." "Very well. For that you will give Archie the envelope and letter, your wife's specimens, 10 or more, and a list of those whose interest in your reputation is lively enough to exploit it. Names, relationships, resentments." The Reverend's mouth worked. He had expected it and still didn't like the taste. "There are 4, he said. 5, if you count the bishop's liaison, though he is more weather than wind." He set the briefcase on the blotter and opened it. The folders inside were labeled in a neat clerical hand. His, not hers. and I saw at once he had not come to us on impulse. First, Lydia Carraway, our music director. She has transformed the choir and believes the church should be a city conservatory with sacraments attached. Margaret was traditional. Friction, Wolfe said. Second, Victor Ames. He owns a chain of boutique fitness studios and made a pledge to fund a wellness center adjacent to the church. Margaret opposed it. She felt it commercialized the grounds. Money with ideas, I said. Always a delight. Third, Simon Delafield, the treasurer. He is devoted to ledgers and not fond of hymnals. He and Margaret quarreled about a fund she administered personally, the Mother's Circle. Petty cash, but pride. And the fourth? Wolfe asked. Maddox swallowed. Evangeline North. She came to me for counseling last winter. She formed an attachment to me. Margaret was aware. It was difficult. Miss North left the parish in March, after the funeral. I made a note to ask how difficult in language our client would tolerate. Wolfe merely folded his lips. And the liaison? Father O'Malley. He has warned me to curb unhelpful publicity and to accept Mr. Ames's gift. He thinks I am stubborn. He may be right. Wolfe glanced at the clock. It was 5 minutes past the hour reserved for orchids, dinner, and civilization. You will leave the materials. Archie will copy the addresses. You will return tomorrow at 10 in the morning. In the interval, Mr. Goodwin will call on Miss Carraway and Mr. Ames. It is odious to postpone dinner for the sake of your soul. Maddox stood. He looked lighter for having set the briefcase down and heavier for having named the names. Thank you, he said. Mr. Wolfe, if this is a cruelty, it is a deliberate one. Someone knows my wife's hand. Someone wants me undone. Wolfe lifted his beer. Someone always does. Go home, Reverend. Say nothing. If anyone asks why you came here, tell them the truth, that you wished to consult a gourmand on the ethics of appetite. He went, and the door closed. The soufflé arrived, and Wolfe, having scolded the universe, forgave it by thirds. After dinner, I collected the packet. The envelope was clean, no smudges, the inexpensive kind sold in pharmacies for conscientious letters to landlords. The postmark was Midtown East, late afternoon. The note paper was better quality than the envelope by 2 leagues. The edges had a faint decal, and the watermark read, Gospel, no joke. A boutique stationer on Lexington sells it to people who find theology in linen rag. If the writer had meant a hoax, they'd chosen a brand with a sense of humor. The exemplars were real enough. Birthday notes, lists, a margin comment on a shopping list about nutmeg, not mace. Paul. It was the sort of intimacy you only see after a life has gotten quiet. I locked them in the safe and phoned Saul Panzer to keep the next day floating. Maybe, I told him, I'll know in the morning. Saul is a patient man and likes his puzzles warm. Then I put on a clean tie and went to see a woman who could make a choir sound like absolution and, if necessary, like a threat. Lydia Carraway's address on West End suggested a rent control miracle or a recent benefactor. Either would do for questions. Lydia Carraway lived on the 5th floor of a brownstone that had once been fashionable and now survived on the strength of its stairwell varnish. The hallway smelled like a compromise between incense and floor wax. When she opened the door, the smell turned into perfume and the varnish lost the argument. Mr. Goodwin, she said, as if she'd practiced it in front of the mirror. Reverend Maddox said you might call. That was fast. Either Maddox had phoned after leaving Wolfe's, or she'd called him the moment she saw me coming up the steps. Either way, it told me something about who needed reassurance. I took off my hat and smiled in the neutral tone Wolfe calls the smile of conditional civility. I'm not selling Bibles, I said, and I'm not buying sins. I just have a few questions about a letter the Reverend received. She stepped aside, and I entered an apartment that looked like a music box had exploded. Sheets of choral arrangements, a baby grand that had seen love and coffee, and a wall of framed certificates announcing that Lydia Carraway had once been a prodigy and intended to stay that way. She wore black slacks, a white blouse, and the sort of poise that makes guilt seem like a hobby. She gestured to a chair. This letter, it's true then. Someone is tormenting him? Tormenting's a word, I said. He got a note in his wife's handwriting saying he knows what he did. You wouldn't happen to know what he did, would you? Her eyes went still. Then, very softly, he was faithful to her. Your certainty is admirable, I said. Based on what? I was with them. Not together, but in the same building most days. Margaret came to choir practice sometimes. She disapproved of almost everything, my tempo, my wardrobe, my repertoire, but she loved him, and he was trying to be the kind of husband she needed. That's all I'll say. That's almost nothing, I said. Did she have enemies? She had opinions, Lydia said dryly. That's the same thing in a parish. The board called her the bishop's conscience. She never let them forget that the church was about salvation, not social events. I filed that under possible motive disguised as virtue. I let my eyes wander over her music desk. A folded program lay there. Concert for renewal, benefiting the St. Anthony's Wellness Center Fund. Below, in smaller print, sponsored by Victor Ames Wellness Enterprises. Interesting sponsor, I said. Her jaw tightened. That was Victor's idea. He thinks the church needs a modern image. Classes, therapy, yoga in the parish hall. Margaret said it was blasphemy. The Reverend tried to mediate, but Margaret made enemies. Ames isn't the sort to forget an insult. Describe him. Charming. Rich. Dangerous in the way ambition always is when it doesn't think it's ambition. That could fit half of Manhattan, but the edges matched the silhouette Wolfe liked to examine under a microscope. I stood. One more thing. Anyone in the choir good at mimicry? Impressions, handwriting, things like that. She frowned. There's a girl, Evangeline North. She left suddenly in spring. She had a fascination with the Reverend. I warned him she was too young to be alone with that kind of emotion, but he thought he could counsel her. He couldn't. She stopped coming after Mrs. Maddox died. Would you say she's the type to nurse a grudge? I'd say she's the type to turn grief into a crusade, Lydia said. She sent me a letter after Margaret's funeral. Pages about redemption, forgiveness, and the purity of confession. It sounded holy until you noticed she didn't forgive anyone. That was enough for one visit. I thanked her and headed downtown. The air had the kind of chill that makes taxi drivers talk about hockey. I let it cool the thoughts forming behind my forehead. A dead woman's handwriting, a jealous girl, a wealthy donor with wounded pride, and a minister who might have believed in truth until it came to his own. Victor Ames's office was in a glass block off Madison, all chrome and aspiration. His receptionist looked like she could bench press self-respect. She paged him, and a minute later he appeared. A man carved from tan and confidence. He offered a hand, which I took only because it would have been rude not to. Archie Goodwin, he said. I've heard of you. You work for that, what's his name, Nero Wolfe. You investigating something for Paul? You're up to date, I said. He's concerned about a note he received. Ames's smile didn't move. He should be concerned about attendance. The man's a good speaker, but no administrator. And he's let that church become a mausoleum. Margaret did too while she lived. Did you admire her? I admired her stubbornness. It kept us from progress. You know how it is. Religion doesn't pay the bills unless it evolves. Evolution can be fatal, I said. Ever see her handwriting? He blinked once. No, why? Because someone's using it to raise the dead. His expression tightened a shade. If you're implying I had anything to do with this, you're wasting your time. I've invested in that parish. I wouldn't jeopardize it for theatrics. Good investment. Excellent. Once the wellness center's built, we'll double our traffic. Faith is about community, and community is business. Even the Reverend knows that. I left before the jargon grew fangs. By the time I reached the street, the evening had turned to drizzle, and the lights of cabs streaked like confessions escaping judgment. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was behind his desk with a book titled The Morality of Appetite. He looked up when I came in. Well, Lydia Carraway says the wife had enemies and the husband had morals. Ames says the church should charge admission. Either one could fake a letter if they wanted to. Miss North? Wolfe asked. Mentioned. Young, religiously intense, romantically attached to the Reverend, and missing since the funeral. He nodded once. Then she is the hinge? The others are noise until she is found. Tomorrow you will locate her. She wrote the letter, or she knows who did. And if she's dead, then someone else is writing her gospel, Wolfe said and reached for his beer. Finding a missing woman in New York isn't a matter of searching. It's a matter of knowing where she'd rather not be found. I started the next morning with coffee, eggs, and the kind of weather that makes detectives sentimental about overcoats. Wolfe was already at his desk by 9, staring at the envelope as if it had offended the principles of logic. He grunted when I told him good morning, which counted as warmth by his standards. You will begin with Miss North, he said without looking up. She is not lost, merely undiscovered. Find where she sings. Sings? Her temperament, as described, is melodramatic. A woman who turns grief into performance will find an audience. Choirs, therapy groups, missions, amateur dramatics. Somewhere she's performing her righteousness. I had to hand it to him. He made sin sound like a casting call. You've got a poetic streak, boss. Want me to audition? Pooh. Take the car. I will be occupied with Mr. Maddox's correspondence. That meant he'd spend the morning reading letters from people who wrote for the pleasure of hearing themselves reason, which was one of his private amusements. I left him to it and headed out. By 11, I'd hit St. Anthony's and the coffee shop next door, where gossip brewed faster than the espresso. The waitress, a thin brunette with the resigned eyes of someone who's seen too many sermons, recognized Evangeline's name at once. Oh, the blonde girl, she said. Used to come in after choir. Real quiet, always reading something heavy. One time she left a book. Letters of the Saints, I think. Gave me the creeps. Still come around? Not lately. Couple of months. She moved out of her place on Amsterdam. Landlady said she had a breakdown after that preacher's wife died. That was enough to start a trail. The landlady turned out to be a compact woman with the attitude of a traffic cop. Evangeline North, she said, arms folded. Paid on time, never made noise. Then in April, gone. Left a note saying she needed silence. Didn't say where. Did she get mail here? A few letters from the church. One from some kind of retreat center upstate. The House of Atonement. I kept the envelope because the stationery smelled like incense. You want it? I did. It was addressed from the House of Atonement, Ridgefield, NY. That put her about 2 hours north. Retreat territory, for the spiritually exhausted and the emotionally overstocked. I called Wolfe from a payphone. She went to a retreat house in Ridgefield, I told him. He made a low noise, the kind that usually precedes a deduction or indigestion. Interesting. That is a Carmelite offshoot. Self-sustaining, sequestered, but not cloistered. The Reverend's wife once visited there, if memory serves from my file on St. Anthony's endowments. A coincidence too neat to accept. You want me to drive up? Yes. Take the letter with you. If she is there, obtain confirmation she wrote to the Reverend. Do not confront her until you have observed her demeanor. If she is not there, secure the register. And if they won't show it, they will. Mention theology to a cleric, and he will forgive any intrusion if it flatters his importance. I drove out of the city, following the Hudson north until the skyline gave way to trees and the sound of traffic turned into the nervous rustle of leaves. Ridgefield was one of those towns that survives by nostalgia. 2 streets, a diner, and a sense of being nearer to heaven simply by being further from Manhattan. The House of Atonement sat behind a gate on a hill, its sign hand-carved and too serene for comfort. A woman in a plain grey dress met me at the door. She had the soft authority of someone used to hearing confessions before breakfast. "I'm looking for Evangeline North," I said. "A friend from St. Anthony's." Her expression didn't change, but her pause did the talking. "Evangeline is with us," she said carefully. "She's resting." "From what?" "From the world." "I'm part of the world," I said. "Mind if I see her?" "That isn't possible right now. She's in retreat." Silence. Even for visitors. She looked torn between charity and caution. "If you leave your name, I'll tell her. Tell her Archie Goodwin called. And tell her the Reverend is in trouble because of a letter." That landed. Her eyes flicked up. Sharp. "You'd better come in." She led me through a corridor that smelled of beeswax and restraint. At the end was a small parlor, and on the wall hung a framed verse about forgiveness. She gestured to a chair and left. 10 minutes later, Evangeline North appeared. She was younger than I'd imagined, barely 30. But her eyes had the kind of stillness you only get after something inside has burned down. She wore the retreat uniform, gray and shapeless, but her hair was a pale gold that refused modesty. "Mr. Goodwin," she said softly, "you shouldn't have come." "That's what everyone tells me." "Then I find something useful. You know about the letter?" Her hands clenched in her sleeves. "I thought he'd understand. It wasn't meant to hurt him." "Then what was it meant to do?" "To make him confess." She met my eyes with a fervor that could have powered a sermon. "He sinned. You think he's holy, but he isn't. Margaret knew. I only reminded him." "Confess to what?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "To what he did to her. To us." I could feel the weight of Wolfe's invisible nod from miles away. "Did you write the note yourself?" She looked startled. "I copied her words. I found them in a drawer when I was helping him after the funeral. It was her handwriting already. She must have written it before she died." That stopped me cold. "You're saying the wife wrote that note before her death?" "Yes," she said simply. "But she never sent it. She feared scandal. I only delivered what she wanted him to see." "Do you have the original?" She hesitated, then reached into the sleeve of her dress and drew out a folded paper, worn from being handled too often. "This is hers. The ink is faded, but it's her writing. I couldn't burn it." I took it carefully. It matched the copy we had. Word for word, even the curve of the letters. There was only one addition, a postscript in smaller script. "If I am gone, he will know why." I looked up at her. "Miss North, you've just changed the whole game." Her eyes filled but didn't fall. "No, Mr. Goodwin. I've only shown you the rules." I left her there, with her silence and her ghosts, and drove back toward the city with the note in my pocket, knowing Wolfe would already have rearranged the board in his mind. When I reached the brownstone that evening, his light was on. He looked up as I entered, eyes glittering like he'd been waiting for the punchline. "Well?" he asked. I handed him the note. The dead woman wrote it. Before she died. He read it, then leaned back. "Then someone ensured her death was useful." "Meaning?" "Meaning," Wolfe said quietly. "We are no longer investigating a fraud, Archie. We are investigating a murder disguised as guilt." Wolfe didn't speak for almost a full minute after reading the original letter. That may not sound like much, but when Nero Wolfe chooses silence, it thickens the air until it has weight. He turned the paper over twice, examining the fibers as though the pulp itself might yield confession. "This," he said finally, "was written with deliberate purpose. The phrasing, "The sin you buried will not stay buried," is not the idiom of a frightened woman. It is the idiom of one preparing testimony. She anticipated revelation. She also anticipated dying, I said. The postscript says so. "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "The postscript is the hinge, not the door. Anyone could add it. Ink fades differently, but the distinction is subtle. You are sure Miss North did not alter it?" She looked like she hadn't altered a breath since March. I'd bet on sincerity, but sincerity doesn't guarantee sanity. He frowned, the corners of his mouth deepening like parenthetical marks of disgust. "We shall see. The Reverend will arrive shortly. He must read what his wife wrote, or what someone wishes him to believe she wrote." At 10 sharp, Maddox appeared, looking as if his collar were 3 sizes too small for repentance. Wolfe handed him the original letter with a delicacy that would have suited a relic. He read it once, twice, then gripped the arm of the chair. "That is her hand, entirely. I can tell from the way she forms the longs." And the postscript. She would not have written that. Never. Margaret never dramatized. She faced death as she faced life. Directly. "Except she didn't face it," I said. "She had a heart attack, right?" He nodded stiffly. "Sudden. No warning." "Heart attacks rarely write farewells," Wolfe observed. "Yet here is one, conveniently phrased to invite speculation. Reverend, I must ask, what precisely were you meant to confess?" The color left his face in layers, like an old fresco exposed to light. "Mr. Wolfe, that question offends." "Yes," Wolfe interrupted, "but it is necessary. Your wife accused you, however cryptically. She claimed you buried a sin. Did she ever suspect you of any indiscretion?" "No," he said, and his voice cracked the way faith sometimes does. "There was misunderstanding, perhaps. Evangeline North came to me for guidance. My wife misconstrued the compassion I offered, but I swear to you, I did nothing unbecoming my office." "Your wife, however," Wolfe said softly, "might have thought otherwise. Enough to confront you, enough to put pen to paper." Maddox stood, then sat again, visibly wrestling himself back into civility. "If you mean Margaret believed I sinned with Miss North, you are mistaken. She pitied the girl. It was she who arranged her retreat." That landed like a dropped hymn book. Wolfe's brows rose an inch. "Your wife arranged it?" "Yes. She told me Evangeline was fragile. That distance would help her. She even corresponded with the director there. That was weeks before her death." "Did she mention this arrangement to anyone else?" "No. She preferred to act quietly. She was a woman of, how shall I put it, private disciplines." "Indeed." Wolfe folded his hands. "Then your wife sent Miss North away, died shortly thereafter, and months later the same Miss North resurrected her handwriting to demand your confession." Maddox bowed his head. "Which means Miss North found that note and interpreted it." "Possibly. Or she was guided to it. Letters do not unbury themselves." Wolfe glanced at me. "Archie, did you notice anything in Miss North's quarters at the retreat that suggested correspondence with others?" "Nothing obvious. But she had a steady supply of stationery, the same kind the note was written on. Gospel watermark." "Coincidence, or communion," Wolfe said. "Someone supplied her with that paper. We must identify who purchased it originally." "You will. Visit the stationer on Lexington this afternoon. Obtain their sales records for the past year." "Stationers love handing over receipts," I said. "You have charm. Use it." He turned back to Maddox. "Meanwhile, Reverend, you will give me access to your wife's effects, her correspondence, her diaries if she kept them, and any record of her dealings with this retreat. I must reconstruct the sequence leading to her death." He hesitated. "You think she was murdered?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that she was made to die at a convenient hour. That is not the same thing, but it is near enough." After Maddox left, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "Archie, There is an odor about this. Moral, not chemical. Someone has found profit in virtue. Meaning Ames, I guessed. He's got money riding on the church property. Possibly. But he would not forge handwriting. He would forge documents. No, the letter is personal. This is vengeance disguised as sanctity. I left him to brood and drove to Lexington. The shop was narrow and smelled of paper dust and polish. The clerk, a willowy woman with a memory like a ledger, brightened when I mentioned the gospel line. Yes, we carry it. Very exclusive. Most of our sales are custom orders, engraved, embossed, personalized. I can check the ledger. She flipped through pages with reverence. Ah, here. Mrs. Margaret Maddox ordered 2 boxes in February, cream with matching envelopes. Anyone else buy the same kind? She nodded slowly. Another, yes. Mr. Simon Delafield. Treasurer, St. Anthony's, if I recall correctly. He said he liked the texture for correspondence with donors. That tidbit jingled like found change. I thanked her and headed back. Wolfe was in the office, mid-beer, and I dropped the information. He grunted, pleased. Of course, Delafield kept the accounts. He knew the household bills, including Mrs. Maddox's purchases. He could reproduce her stationery, even her handwriting, with access to her notes. If she wrote the original letter, he could have preserved a copy, then exploited it later. For what? I asked. For leverage. Suppose the Reverend's reputation were tarnished. Delafield could control the purse, the narrative, and the bishop's favor. It is a banal motive, but effective. I started pacing. So Delafield writes a letter in the dead wife's hand, sends it to Maddox, and spooks him into a breakdown. Why wait 6 months? Because, Wolfe said, setting down his glass. The groundwork required patience. Perhaps he needed Miss North to lend authenticity. Perhaps she found something he did not expect. Tomorrow we shall invite Mr. Delafield to enlighten us. He reached for another beer, his eyes half-lidded. And Archie, see that Saul Panzer is available. I foresee a disturbance in our peace. Someone will not wish that letter examined further. I nodded, already feeling the thread tightening. The brownstone felt smaller, the kind of quiet that waits for someone to make a wrong move. In Nero Wolfe's house, that's usually everyone but him. I called Saul that night and told him to keep his Thursday open. He didn't ask why. He knows Wolfe doesn't summon him for tea. The next morning dawned grey and indecisive, the sort of weather that encourages bad news to show up early. Wolfe had already spoken to Fritz about serving lunch an hour late, which was his way of admitting we'd have company worth missing a meal for. At 11:30 sharp, Simon Delafield arrived, punctual and polished. His briefcase was the kind you buy when you expect to be admired for your competence. He was a small man, with features so neat they almost disappeared. Wolfe watched him enter the room without rising, his eyes half-lidded, a faint smile hidden behind disinterest. "Mr. Delafield," Wolfe said. "Please sit. Archie. Beer." The treasurer smiled, but it was the kind of smile used for board meetings and funerals. "I must admit, Mr. Wolfe, I was curious when you called. The Reverend said you were investigating a personal matter." Wolfe inclined his head. "We are engaged to clarify a sequence of events concerning the late Mrs. Maddox. You were her treasurer, I believe." "Yes. She chaired the Mother's Circle Fund. A meticulous woman. I often joked that she could find a missing nickel faster than I could find my conscience." Wolfe's eyes narrowed a fraction. "You admired her." "I respected her," Delafield said smoothly. "Admiration is emotional, and emotion leads to deficits." "Indeed. And you knew her handwriting." "Of course. We exchanged notes daily. I filed half of them." "Then you will be pleased to know one has resurfaced." Wolfe gestured, and I passed the copy of the letter to Delafield. He read it carefully, lips tightening just enough to register recognition. When he finished, he placed it on the desk with the delicacy of someone setting down a confession. "Ah, So that's the infamous message. Yes, it's hers. Or close enough. Close enough? I asked. He shrugged. Her hand was precise, not ornate. This looks slightly forced. The line tremor is too even. I'd call it an imitation, a good one, but mechanical. You would know, Wolfe said. Delafield turned toward him. Are you implying something? I imply nothing. I infer everything. Mrs. Maddox ordered 2 boxes of gospel stationery in February, yes? Yes. I placed the order myself. She disliked the delay in supply. And you ordered the same type weeks later. He blinked, then smiled faintly. Stationery is not proprietary, Mr. Wolfe. No, but imitation is rarely innocent. Wolfe's tone was soft, but the weight of it pressed the air flat. You shared her correspondence files, her budgets, and the handwriting of her daily notes. You had all the ingredients for resurrection. Delafield rose halfway from his chair, then remembered where he was. If you're accusing me of forgery, you'll need more than coincidence. Of course, Wolfe said, which is why you will remain seated while Mr. Goodwin telephones Saul Panzer. Mr. Panzer is, among other things, an expert in handwriting analysis. I had the phone in my hand when Delafield's tone shifted from smooth to urgent. There's no need for theatrics. I didn't write the letter. I knew it existed. That stopped Wolfe's thumb mid-flick of the lighter. Explain. Margaret showed it to me, Delafield said quickly. She wrote it after discovering that the Reverend had been meeting privately with Miss North. She was furious, felt betrayed, but not by adultery. She believed he was compromising doctrine, softening sermons to comfort the girl. She wanted him to confess it to the bishop. Then she changed her mind, said destroying it would be unchristian. I thought she had. You thought, Wolfe said. Yes. After her death, I closed her accounts and found nothing. I assumed she'd burned it. Then this week, the Reverend told me someone had sent him the letter anonymously. I was as shocked as anyone. Shocked, perhaps, Wolfe murmured, but not surprised. You anticipated its reappearance. You feared it. That is why you accepted our summons without protest. Delafield's fingers twitched on his briefcase clasp. I came because I respect the Reverend, and because I dislike scandal. Your dislike, Wolfe said, has motivated many men to very creative crimes. You said she was furious. Did she threaten her husband? Not in words, but she looked at him differently afterward. Detached, as if something sacred had cracked. A week later, she was dead. Of heart failure, I said. Yes, the doctor said stress may have contributed. Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. Stress rarely measures itself in milligrams, Mr. Delafield, but poison does. The treasurer's head snapped up. Poison? Pure speculation, Wolfe said, though the word had never sounded less idle. You were close enough to know her health, to manage her medications, perhaps even to prepare her tea. Were you? Delafield rose again, white-faced. You've gone far enough. I'll not stay to be insulted. He reached the door before Wolfe spoke, low and deliberate. Mr. Delafield, you may go, but know this. The letter is not the only thing revived. Truth has a way of following those who profit by its burial. Delafield hesitated, then left without another word. When the door closed, the silence stretched taut. He's lying, I said. Of course, Wolfe replied, but not about everything. Mrs. Maddox did write the letter, and she confided in him. That is the thread. He did not mail it. He lacks imagination. Someone else found it after her death. Someone who understood both the letter's meaning and its value. Evangeline, he nodded. She retrieved it, copied it, sent it, but she was not alone. The access, the timing, the precise manipulation of sentiment, this was orchestrated. Reverend Maddox is being maneuvered, not haunted. By who? Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. The only one who gained stability and power from his downfall. Victor Ames, I whistled. Ames has money, not theology. Exactly, Wolfe said. He wishes to own the church, not its soul. With scandal, the Reverend resigns. Ames's wellness empire inherits consecrated ground. Delafield abets him, perhaps unwillingly. Miss North, a zealot, believes she serves righteousness, a perfect trinity of guilt, greed, and gullibility. Sounds tidy, I said, but we're short on proof. Proof, Wolfe murmured, is a patient flower. We shall cultivate it. He turned his eyes toward the window where the light was paling into afternoon. Tomorrow evening, Archie, we will host a gathering. The Reverend, Mr. Ames, Miss Carraway, and Mr. Delafield. Inform them that Nero Wolfe requires their presence. I detest crusades, but occasionally one must be waged indoors. I jotted the names down, already picturing the faces. Wolfe hadn't moved, but I could tell his mind was building the trap plank by plank. Outside, the city kept its noise. Inside, the brownstone seemed to hold its breath. When Nero Wolfe decides to gather suspects, even the furniture listens. Wolfe always treated the act of summoning suspects like planting orchids, each name chosen, each word calibrated. That evening, he dictated the invitations with the precision of a man deploying artillery. The phrasing was polite, but it had the gravitational pull of an ultimatum. Nero Wolfe requests your presence at his office tomorrow evening at 7:30 for the resolution of a private inquiry. That was it. No mention of the case, the letter, or the Reverend. Just inevitability wrapped in civility. The next day passed in the kind of quiet that pretends to be calm but is really calculation. Fritz prepped dinner early and fussed over the timing. Wolfe wanted nothing served that might distract from deduction. I spent the afternoon confirming attendance. Carraway was curious and a little defiant. Ames was irritated but intrigued. Delafield was resigned, and the Reverend sounded like a man heading for judgment. Wolfe received each confirmation with a single grunt that meant, as expected. By 7:20, the office smelled faintly of orchids and baked trout. The air was heavy with Wolfe's particular blend of control and anticipation. He had arranged his desk with military neatness, the 2 letters side by side, the stationery box, and a single yellow envelope that I hadn't seen before. "You planning to show them that?" I asked, nodding toward it. He didn't look up from his beer. "It is bait, Archie. They will not see the hook until they are already chewing." At 7:30 sharp, the bell rang. I opened the door to a procession of unease. Maddox arrived first, his collar wilting, followed by Lydia Carraway, whose expression said she'd dressed for a concert and found herself at a funeral instead. Delafield came next, composed but colorless, and Ames last, exuding cologne and the confidence of a man who believes money is the last word in any argument. They filed into the office like reluctant jurors. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. But his gaze performed the work of standing. He greeted them with a nod that was both welcome and warning. "Please be seated," he said. "We shall be brief, though not painless. Mr. Goodwin, close the door." When the latch clicked, the room sealed itself from the rest of the world. Wolfe began without ceremony. "You have all been drawn together by the late Mrs. Margaret Maddox and her letter, authentic, accusatory, and posthumous. Its reappearance has distressed her husband, confused her associates, and offended my sense of order. It is time to resolve that offense." Ames leaned back, smirking. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Mr. Wolfe? Theology isn't your field." "No," Wolfe said, "but deceit is universal. Let us review. Mrs. Maddox wrote a letter to her husband, accusing him of a concealed sin. She did not send it. After her death, the letter, copied in her hand, arrived by post. It was intended to disgrace the Reverend and, by extension, destabilize his parish. Every person in this room has reason to wish for that outcome." He turned his eyes on Carraway first. "You, Miss Carraway, are ambitious. You resent restrictions and regard the church as a platform for talent rather than devotion. You quarreled with Mrs. Maddox over your role, and her death left you freer. But you lack the cunning for forgery. You are relieved by her absence, not obsessed with it. Her chin lifted. That's not flattering, but it's fair. Wolfe nodded once, then shifted to Delafield. You, sir, possessed opportunity. You handled her correspondence and knew her hand. You could reproduce it and distribute it, but you are too cautious. You would not risk exposure when a ledger error could serve the same purpose. Fear and greed rarely collaborate gracefully. Delafield's mouth twitched, but he said nothing. Then Wolfe turned to Ames. You, Mr. Ames, have ambition more corrosive than greed. You seek to modernize faith for profit, to make the church a subsidiary of your enterprise. You required leverage to remove the reverend and install a more compliant figurehead. The letter provided that leverage. Ames barked a short laugh. You're implying I sent it? I wouldn't waste postage on superstition. Indeed you would not, but you might allow another to do it, thinking her act served righteousness when it served you. The true hand behind this letter was guided, not coerced. He gestured to the yellow envelope. This arrived this morning. It is a second letter in the same hand as the first, but addressed not to the Reverend, to you, Mr. Ames. The contents are edifying. He nodded to me. Read it, Archie. I unfolded it carefully and read aloud. Mr. Ames, the temple cannot stand upon deceit. You have made a covenant with greed, and the Almighty will not abide it. Confess before you are exposed. Ames's smirk faltered. That's ridiculous. Who? Miss North, Wolfe said. Our pious fugitive. She has rediscovered her faith as vengeance. She sent the first letter to Reverend Maddox at your encouragement, believing she was avenging his wife. You promised to protect her, to help her purge the church of corruption. Instead, you exploited her zeal to blacken Maddox's name, knowing the scandal would force his resignation. Unfortunately for you, she has now repented and chosen to expose her confessor. That's a lie, Ames snapped, half rising. I barely know the girl. Wolfe's voice sharpened. Your telephone records disagree. 4 calls to the Ridgefield retreat within 2 weeks of her arrival, and the stationer's ledger shows a purchase of identical gospel stationery under your company's account, used for corporate correspondence. How conveniently pious. For a moment, silence held. Maddox stared at Ames as if seeing him for the first time. Delafield looked nauseous. Lydia leaned forward, whispering, Good Lord. Ames recovered quickly, but not enough. This is conjecture. You have no proof that I sent anything. Wolfe's smile was almost gentle. Proof? You misunderstand me. I am not a prosecutor. I do not require the machinery of law, only the mechanics of truth. The Reverend has already provided them. He came this morning with his wife's personal file, which included her correspondence with the retreat. Among them was a note, unsigned but unmistakably yours, offering a substantial donation if Miss North's stay were extended. You needed her sequestered, pliable, and convinced she served virtue. Ames's color drained. You can't prove I wrote that. I can, Wolfe said softly, but I need not. You will confess, privately to the Reverend and publicly to your board, before this evening concludes. If you do not, I shall ensure the police learn that your philanthropic expansion was built upon forged salvation. The words settled like dust after an explosion. No one moved. Ames sat slowly, staring at the carpet. Maddox's voice broke the silence, low and shaken. You used her faith against her? Ames didn't answer. Lydia looked at Wolfe. What will happen to Miss North? She will recover, Wolfe said. She has already written her final confession. I've arranged for her to be transferred to a sanatorium where devotion is optional. Then he turned his chair toward the globe, signaling dismissal. Gentlemen, ladies, Mr. Goodwin will show you out. I suggest you each spend the evening reflecting on the uses and misuses of faith. They are rarely distinct. They filed out silently. When the door shut, Wolfe exhaled and reached for his beer. "Justice, Archie," he murmured, "is not divine, it is domestic. It must be prepared, served hot, and consumed before it cools." I nodded, thinking of the Reverend's face and Miss North's trembling hands. "And the leftovers?" Wolfe looked at me. "We never keep them." The brownstone was quiet again after the last echo of the door. That kind of silence feels earned, not gifted. Wolfe didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, eyes half closed, the empty beer glass on the desk between his fingers. I'd seen that stillness before. It wasn't rest. It was digestion. I gave him 5 minutes before I said, "You realize Ames isn't going to make a full confession to anyone but his attorney." Wolfe's eyelids fluttered open. "He will make one sufficient for our purpose. He's a man of commerce, not conviction. Once he calculates the cost of scandal versus concession, the arithmetic will compel him to humility." "Sure," I said. "He'll sell repentance wholesale." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "He will at least withdraw his clause from the Reverend's parish. That is sufficient. The law will tend to the rest, if the Reverend chooses to involve it." I walked to the window. The night outside was slick with rain, the streetlights drawing long yellow reflections that wobbled with every passing car. It was one of those New York nights when truth feels like something you have to keep indoors or it'll dissolve in the damp. "He's not the only one who'll have trouble sleeping," I said. "The Reverend's going to spend months explaining how he let a con artist turn his parish into a puppet show." Wolfe reached for another beer. "He's not the first man undone by virtue. It requires less pressure to fracture the morale than the corrupt." I didn't answer that. There wasn't a point. He was right. He usually is when it costs someone else. At 9:30 the phone rang. Fritz had long gone upstairs, and Wolfe didn't move, so I took it. Reverend Maddox's voice was low, unsteady but deliberate. "Mr. Goodwin, I wanted to say thank you for tonight. I've just come from Ames's office. He resigned his position on the board and issued a public withdrawal of funding for the wellness project. The bishop accepted his letter within the hour." "That's fast work for a man who likes to meditate on profits." "He looked smaller than I remembered," the Reverend said, as if guilt had been waiting all along and only needed an invitation. "Don't give guilt too much credit," I said. "It usually shows up after the police." He gave a soft, tired chuckle. "You have a cynical grace. Mr. Goodwin, tell Mr. Wolfe I'll call tomorrow. There are other things I must put right." I hung up and turned to find Wolfe studying me. "He will resign, of course," Wolfe said. "He cannot preach on Sunday with his conscience in tatters." "Then what happens to Miss Carroway or Delafield?" "Miss Carroway will be promoted to interim director of music. She will enjoy it briefly, then find the burden of leadership less melodious. Delafield will retain his treasurership, but will write smaller checks for himself. He has seen a ghost tonight." I dropped into the red chair. "You've got everyone neatly filed away? Even Miss North?" "Ah," he said, his tone softening. "Miss North is the only one I pity. She mistook faith for license and emotion for divine instruction. That mixture is volatile. It ignites easily, burns brightly, and leaves ash." "She thought she was helping," I said. "Yes, the most dangerous justification in existence." The clock chimed 10. Wolfe stood, a rare event deserving notation, and crossed to the globe. He spun it once with a fingertip, then stopped it with precision on the Atlantic. "Do you know, Archie, what I detest most about religion? Besides the sermons. Absolution. It is a license to repeat." He turned from the globe, eyes narrowing. "Every creed forgives itself faster than it forgives the world. Ames will sleep eventually, the Reverend will heal. Only the dead woman remains uncompromising." "Margaret Maddox," I said. He inclined his head. "She is the only one who will not edit her truth." The room felt heavier again, though it might have just been the weight of his words. I watched him lower himself back into the chair, and the brownstone seemed to exhale. Fritz's footsteps sounded faintly from upstairs. The smell of thyme and butter drifted from the kitchen like the world returning to order. "What about the police?" I asked. "You going to send Kramer the leftovers?" "Inspector Kramer detests leftovers almost as much as I do," he said. "No. The Reverend will report Ames's attempt at coercion. The authorities will pursue his business dealings, perhaps discover fraud, perhaps not. The machinery will turn slowly, as it must, but the essential truth has been extracted. That is our task." He poured himself another half-glass of beer, a courtesy to the day's exhaustion. "Archie, you may inform Saul his services are no longer required, and have him send his account. Efficiency deserves remuneration." I stood, stretching. "You know, if you ever let me bill by the hour, I'd be able to retire." "You would squander retirement within a fortnight," Wolfe said without looking at me. "You thrive on disarray." I grinned. "Somebody has to make your world interesting." He didn't argue, which was as close to gratitude as Nero Wolfe gets. I went to the front door and looked out. The rain had stopped. The city lights were sharper now, cutting through the damp air like resolve. I thought about the Reverend, his ruined faith, and the woman who'd tried to save him with a forged gospel. When I came back, Wolfe had closed his eyes again, the second beer untouched beside him. I was halfway to the stairs when he spoke, low and deliberate. "Archie." "Yeah?" "There is a peculiar symmetry in sin. It never begins where it claims to. Miss North's zeal, Ames's ambition, the Reverend's pride, all threads of the same weave. And the letter, that letter. It was not a curse. It was a mirror. Each of them saw what they already feared." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to add to that except silence, and Wolfe already owned the patent on that. He opened one eye, weary but content. "We will dine early tomorrow. Fritz has promised guinea hen in Madeira. After that, no visitors for a week." "Your version of repentance," I said. "Precisely," he murmured, closing his eyes again. I left him there, surrounded by the hum of the orchids upstairs and the ticking clock that never needed winding. Outside, the rain began again, soft, deliberate, cleansing nothing, and for once, I didn't mind. It felt like the kind of night the city used to have before it learned how to sin so cleverly. The next morning began with the smell of Fritz's coffee and the silence that always follows a storm, the storm in this case being moral rather than meteorological. Wolfe was at the dining table in his robe, dissecting a peach with surgical concentration. He acknowledged my arrival with a grunt, which for him ranked just below a standing ovation. "Any word from the Reverend?" I asked. Wolfe gestured toward the folded Gazette beside his plate. "He has supplied one himself. Read." The article was short, buried between a union scandal and a new Broadway revival. Reverend Paul Maddox announced his temporary leave from St. Anthony's to reaffirm his faith through reflection and solitude. Sources close to the church confirm that Victor Ames, philanthropist and entrepreneur, has resigned from the parish board following internal disagreements. I set the paper down. Neat and bloodless, no mention of forged salvation or moral extortion. "Nor should there be," Wolfe said. "Public decency prefers discretion to detail. Ames has escaped indictment, but not ignominy. His enterprises will suffer. He will recover. Men without conscience are resilient." And the Reverend. "He will not return to his pulpit soon. He will attempt humility, which is tedious, but he may learn sincerity in the process." I sipped coffee. "You sound almost pastoral yourself." He sighed, a long exhalation that made the orchids upstairs rustle in sympathy. "Pfui. I'm only weary of the obvious. Humanity clings to illusion as ivy to stone. Remove one and the other crumbles." "Then you must love your work," I said. His eyes narrowed. "You misinterpret. I endure it. It is less noxious than idleness. The doorbell rang then, punctual enough to cut through philosophy. Fritz answered and returned with a card on a tray. Wolfe read it and nodded. "Show him in." It was Delafield. He looked more like a clerk than ever, his composure cracked at the edges. He bowed slightly to Wolfe, avoided my eyes, and perched on the edge of the red chair like a man expecting to be cross-examined. "Mr. Wolfe," he said quietly, "I won't stay long. I came to thank you for what you didn't do." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Ah, you mean for not handing you to Inspector Kramer?" Delafield winced. "Yes, I was complicit. Not in forgery, but in silence. I suspected Ames used the letter to coerce the Reverend. I said nothing. I told myself it was prudence. It was cowardice." Wolfe folded his hands. "A distinction of degree, not kind, but confession, however belated, serves utility. What do you intend to do with it?" "I've already submitted my resignation as treasurer," he said. "I told the bishop everything I knew. He accepted it and, strangely, offered me another post, accounting for a mission school in Harlem. I think I'll take it. Numbers are safer when they aren't laundering faith." Wolfe gave a small nod. "Commendable. Self-flagellation is not my prescription, but rehabilitation through arithmetic may suffice." Delafield stood. "I wanted you to know, and to say, Mrs. Maddox would have approved of how this ended." Wolfe's tone cooled slightly. "No, Mr. Delafield, she would not. She believed in redemption. What we accomplished was merely equilibrium." The man looked startled, then nodded as though accepting a private verdict and left as quietly as he came. When the door closed, Wolfe muttered, "An intelligent coward is less dangerous than a righteous fool." I leaned against the desk. "That wraps it up nicely, doesn't it? Ames ruined, Delafield redeemed, Maddox retired, and Miss North off praying herself sane." He grunted. "You oversimplify. Miss North remains volatile. Zeal seldom decays. It ferments. If she finds another conscience willing to ferment with her, we may again read her name in unpleasant company. Want me to keep an eye on her?" "No," he said. "Let Providence have its chance. It rarely succeeds, but the attempt is amusing." He rose then, no small event, and moved toward the office, signaling the end of breakfast and the restoration of hierarchy. I followed because routine demanded it. By the time he settled into his chair, the morning sun had crossed the library window and turned the dust motes into a slow dance of gold. I perched on the edge of my desk. "So what was really in that yellow envelope last night, the one you never showed them?" He looked up, mildly offended. "A blank sheet of paper." I whistled. "You bluffed Ames with nothing?" "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "I bluffed him with certainty. He believed I possessed what he feared most, proof. Fear of exposure is more persuasive than exposure itself." "You're improving as a dramatist," I said. He allowed himself the faintest smirk. "A necessity. Men of reason must occasionally employ theater when dealing with creatures of emotion." The phone rang again. I took it. It was the Reverend, his voice subdued but clear. "Mr. Goodwin, please tell Mr. Wolfe that I've decided not to leave the ministry entirely. I'll take a smaller parish, one less burdened by politics. And I'll write to Miss North. She deserves understanding, not judgment." When I relayed the message, Wolfe said, "Tell him understanding and judgment are the same thing, merely applied by different tongues." I didn't pass that along. There are limits to pastoral diplomacy. By noon, the brownstone had returned to its natural state, uninterrupted order. Fritz was preparing guinea hen in Madeira, as promised, and the orchids upstairs hummed in the warmth. Wolfe dictated a letter to a publisher disputing a botanical misprint, which he did with the gravity most men reserve for revolutions. Around 2, I caught him gazing at the second letter again, the copy Miss North had sent to Ames. He hadn't destroyed it. For Wolfe, that meant something. "You keeping that as a souvenir?" I asked. He didn't look up. "As a specimen. It demonstrates the anatomy of deceit born from conviction. Observe, it contains no falsehood, only misapplied truth. The most efficient lie requires sincerity." I smiled. "Maybe you should print that on a card for your next client." He closed the file gently. "No, they already know it, Archie. They simply need reminding." Fritz announced lunch, and Wolfe heaved himself up, muttering about the eternal incompetence of mankind. I followed him to the dining room. The storm outside had passed entirely. The city light slanted clear and cool across the table. As he poured himself a modest glass of wine, he said, almost to himself, "We have restored order, not harmony. Harmony is divine. Order, human. I am content with the latter." I raised my glass. "To order, then." He nodded once. "And to appetite, the only faith worth keeping." I couldn't argue. Outside somewhere, another sinner was probably writing a letter, and another case was waiting to be delivered. But for now, there was lunch, and in Nero Wolfe's world, that counted as grace. Wolfe always claimed that endings were untidy, but he also insisted on having the last word. 3 days after the case settled itself like dust on polished wood, the brownstone returned to its native rhythm. Orchids, beer, silence, and the creak of civilization adjusting to its proper axis. I'd been catching up on paperwork, meaning I was pretending to file expense receipts while waiting for Wolfe to deliver one of his sermons on human nature. It came, right on schedule. "Archie," he said, setting down the morning's Gazette with a frown that suggested the world had again failed to meet his standards. "This business with the Reverend has been instructive." "Sure," I said. "Instructive like a caution sign at a broken bridge." He ignored that. "Consider the premise. A man of faith undone not by sin, but by someone else's interpretation of it. A woman whose belief in purity becomes corruption. Another whose greed cloaks itself in piety. Even the dead, unwilling to stay silent, contribute to the confusion. It is a perfect demonstration of the gospel of sin." "That's poetic, but I'll need subtitles." He leaned back, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. "Sin, Archie, is not what people do. It is what they justify. Every act in this affair wore virtue's mask. The Reverend excused pride as humility. Miss North excused vengeance as devotion. Ames excused exploitation as philanthropy. And the rest of us, perhaps even I, excused curiosity as justice." I took that in. Wolfe didn't often include himself in humanity's ledger, even on the credit side. "If you're feeling self-critical, maybe you ought to lie down," I said. He gave me the look that precedes a lecture, then surprised me by smiling faintly. "I am merely acknowledging that detection and judgment are siblings, both born of vanity. One seeks to uncover truth, the other to improve it. I prefer the first. It leaves dinner intact." That line landed with the kind of symmetry he enjoyed. Fritz chose that exact moment to appear and announce that lunch was served, veal kidneys and cream and brandy. Wolfe rose, not quickly but with purpose, and crossed to the dining room. I followed because no man with a conscience ignores Fritz's cooking. Over the meal, he returned to the subject as if it had been simmering along with the sauce. "The Reverend will resume his duties in due course. Miss Carroway will flourish briefly, then overreach. Delafield will balance the Lord's books. Miss North will pray for forgiveness, though she will never believe she's received it. And Ames, he will invest again, perhaps in another form of salvation. Men like him always do." I chewed thoughtfully. "And us?" "We, my dear Archie," he said, cutting into a kidney with the precision of an autopsy, "remain where we belong. Here, surrounded by civilization, insulated from its hysteria, that too is a form of faith." "Faith in what?" "In structure," he said simply. "In the knowledge that order, once restored, can sustain appetite." I grinned. You mean we eat, they sin, and the world keeps turning? Precisely. He finished his plate, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and reached for his beer. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle of cutlery. Then Wolfe looked up, eyes glinting with the faintest trace of amusement. You may write your report, Archie, he said. Title it what you like. Perhaps The Gospel of Sin. It will satisfy your taste for melodrama. I'll do that, I said. And if anyone asks what the moral was, tell them there isn't one, he said. Morals are for sermons. Facts are for detectives. And appetite, he raised his glass, is for the living. He drank, and that was the benediction. After lunch, he went upstairs to his orchids, and I stayed in the office. The rain had started again, tapping the window in slow rhythm. I pulled the file toward me. The letters, the notes, the single blank sheet Wolfe had used to bluff Ames. All the pieces that had spun out of one woman's dying words. I locked them in the cabinet, poured myself a small drink, and sat back. Outside, somewhere beyond the rain, the church bells of St. Anthony's began to toll. I listened until they faded, slow and solemn, the sound of a city forgiving itself by habit. Then I turned off the lamp. Another case done, another sermon preached in silence. Wolfe would call it equilibrium, I'd call it closure. Whatever it was ours. And as I stepped out into the night, I thought of the Reverend's wife, her words still echoing from the grave. The sin you buried will not stay buried. Maybe she'd been right. Maybe Wolfe was too. Either way, the world didn't stop spinning, and dinner was always at 7.